Welcome to Carbon Conversations, a podcast by Biochar Life, where we explore the cutting edge of environmental solutions. From biochar to smart agriculture to the climate tech revolution, we sit down with experts and business leaders at the forefront of change. This is your host, Matt Rickard. Morning, Simon. Welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Yeah, very well, thanks. And thanks for having me on. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Yeah, afternoon here. My pleasure. And where are you in the world? So for our audience's sake, so they know.
I am in Bristol in the UK.
Cool. Sunny. Well, we're in the summer, so hopefully you're getting a bit of good weather.
Well, do you know what? We've had spectacular weather all summer, but this particular day, looking out the window over here, it is actually very grey and raining, but it's welcome rain.
Awesome. Well, same as here in Northern Thailand. Anyway, we won't do what English people do and talk about the weather. We want to talk about your work in CDR, Sylvera, I think, as a good entry point, obviously to get a bit of a background on yourself, your role at Sylvera, but leading into that, I mean, you worked in biochar as going through your profile, if I'm right, 10, 12 years ago even, and before people even knew what biochar was. The world is still discovering it, and it's very talked about, particularly in the last 12 months. But it'd be really interesting to hear first a bit of your kind of entry into the biochar space and what you were doing all that time ago in biochar, and then, how that leads into today in the CDR space with Sylvera.
Yeah, cool. Well, I mean, I actually discovered biochar in 2006. I was working for a charity. We were raising funds to build wind turbines in Tamil Nadu in southern India, and using the proceeds to fund local community projects, one of which was it was kind of a cook stove project, but these cook stoves were also sort of small scale pyrolysis kilns, and they were processing twigs and branches to generate heat for cooking, but also biochar. And I was just particularly inspired by the kind of circularity of that. It was a sort of a kind of a waste management meets renewable heat meets carbon removal, as well as soil health as well. And so I absolutely loved it as a concept. I didn't actually enjoy working for a charity very much, and I started sort of looking for other work. And I was lucky enough just to stumble across the world's first commercial biochar company, a company called Carbon Gold, which had been set up by these three characters. The first was a chap called Craig Sams. He founded Green and Black's, the chocolate company, which had just been bought by Cadbury's at the time. Also the former chairman of the Soil Association in the UK, a big soil sort of based charity. And then the second guy was a guy called Dan Morell. He founded the Carbon Neutral company, claims to have sold the first ever carbon credit in the voluntary market. And then a Silicon Valley billionaire who was particularly inspired by the concept of biochar, which he had newly discovered. And so he had invested basically $1 million into these two guys and said, right, go and commercialize the concept of biochar. And this is in sort of 2000 and 2008. So I had heard of them. I managed to get hold of Craig through my own network, and I managed to convince him to give me a job. So my first day at Carbon Gold, I had the book, I don't know whether you've seen it, Biochar for Environmental Management. It was like the early stage sort of biochar Bible, had that volume 1 tucked under my arm. I was on an aeroplane flying out to Belize in Central America to try and convince a bunch of cocoa growers to turn their tree prunings into biochar using brick-built kilns, the Adam retort, which we were building for them in cocoa plantations. So pretty spit and sawdust stuff back in 2008, but it was exciting times.
So back in 2008, I mean, that's way before I knew anything about biochar, but back then was the discussion purely around the environmental benefits being, soil health and soil strength, or was the carbon conversation there then in terms of removals? What was the kind of conversation at that point?
Yeah, it was the Carbon Gold's first business model was actually very similar to the business models of project developers that you see now. So we had carbon was on the table, although it was biochar as a sort of offsetting project was very underdeveloped. So there was no methodology, and no one had really heard of it. But carbon was on the table through the generation of carbon credits as well as soil health. And so, and of course, the whole idea was that, and it was kind of also couched in regenerative agriculture or climate smart agriculture. And so the idea was that the whole project was funded by Cadbury's, and they were very keen that the cocoa sort of growers prune their trees to get airflow through the orchards to stop this fungal disease called black pod sort of taking hold. So, and then we stepped in and said, okay, well, why don't we take those tree prunings, turn them into biochar and put them into the soil, and they'll help with nutrient cycling and soil health, all of the kind of biochar co-benefits that we know and love. And so it had those two things very much on the table. However, it was despite our best efforts, the carbon thing didn't take off for many, many years later. And so in those early years, we developed the first methodology for biochar, which was rejected by the BCS on the grounds of permanence. Ironic that we're still having durability arguments about biochar now. We lobbied at COP15 at the Copenhagen climate change talks. We actually teamed up, because we were operating in Belize, as part of the Association of Small Island States with the then Prime Minister of the Maldives, a guy called Mohammed Nasheed, and he represented sort of biochar amongst many other things, and took that into the UN to try and get it into the negotiating papers. Unfortunately, that was not successful, and that kind of signed the death knell for biochar as a negative emissions technology for quite some years. And so we were left with, again, our mission was to commercialize biochar. We were left with just the agronomic benefits and the soil benefits as a sort of, I guess, a characteristic around which to build a business plan.
Interesting. I mean, yeah, it's obviously come a long way. I mean, similar for us, I suppose, not myself, even before my time, but our organization have been teaching farmers here in Thailand for about 12, 13, maybe 14 years to create biochar, nothing to do with the carbon markets, purely to do with, hey, here's a solution in these rural areas for farmers not to burn their crop waste, which is such a massive problem, and to turn it into something valuable that can be put back into the soil, help to improve yields, help to strengthen soil, because they farm it so much, and then when we get the rain season, it just doesn't hold water. So, yeah, biochar was always there, but certainly, now we're seeing it talked about a lot more because of the CDR space. So, and maybe a good segue. I mean, in terms of you're with Sylvera now, and not everyone will know Sylvera. Many people do, but quick intro to Sylvera, what you guys do, and why rating agencies are important in this market now.
So Sylvera is a carbon data platform. Many people know us for our sort of capacity and experience in nature-based solutions in the MBS, and we provide sort of data, ratings, as well as market insights to help the main participants in the voluntary carbon market, the buyers and the investors and the suppliers, the project developers, navigate their way successfully through sort of the complexities of the voluntary carbon market. Now we are trying to build our capacity into the carbon dioxide removal space as well, the CDR. So they've taken me on, and we're building a team around sort of consolidating our activities in CDR to try and achieve that. Your second question was around sort of around the sort of the challenges of CDR at the moment in terms of sort of from a Sylvera perspective.
Yeah, well, now you got to. I was asking. Yeah, you come into Sylvera. What do you guys do, and what are you seeing in terms of the landscape of CDR and how Sylvera impacts both buyers and sellers with what you do?
So the CDR space has its own sort of unique set of characteristics, and as I'm sure you've experienced, I mean, there are many reasons not to do it. And we hear this all the time. It's specific to CDR and quite different from nature-based solutions, in as much as it's we often joke about sort of the conversation that sustainability sort of teams must be having with their sort of finance directors about trying to release some funds for the purchase of carbon removal credits. In terms of it's very expensive. I mean, CDR carbon credits are at least 10 times as much as an MPS credit.
Yeah.
It carries high reputational risk. A lot of organisations are criticised rather than sort of celebrated for participating in the market. It's not mandated by law, so nobody actually has to do it. It's voluntary. I mean, obviously that's the case for the entire market. And it's very complicated. These new engineered sort of CDR project types carry their own set of sort of risks and uncertainties, and they're relatively unproven when compared to other sort of offsetting project types. And so, you wouldn't be surprised if the finance director said, well, that's a no from me. Come back when the argument's a bit more convincing. And so, and you put that into the context of just the situation that we're in. Sort of generally, you only have to look at CDR.FYI's sort of homepage to it very much brings to life the scale of the challenge that lies ahead of us. Right? I looked at it this morning. I'm just going to look at my notes here. It's something like 0.37%. Of the 10 billion tons that we need to be removing every year by 2050. That's how far we've got. And so the scale of the challenge that lies ahead of us is completely out of kilter with the scale of the response that we have managed to sort of deliver so far. And so the mission of an organisation like Sylvera is to try and address that challenge and we urgently need to bring more and more participants into the market, generally the voluntary carbon market, but specifically the CDR market. Microsoft can't do it all, frankly. We have to get more participants in. We need to stimulate greater demand, and it can't just be the private sector. And so if Sylvera can support that process by providing data, transparency, insights, which in turn builds awareness and confidence and trust, then I hope our actions will result in more participants in the marketplace and the scaling up of some of the project types that we urgently need to address that 10 billion challenge that faces us all.
You mentioned Microsoft. I was about to mention them. So, when you look at that CDR report, what was it? 0.37, I think you just gave us a stat.
That's right. Yeah.
I didn't know that statistic, but the other couple of things that are quite striking is the word Microsoft everywhere, and also biochar everywhere in terms of deliveries, not necessarily in terms of sales, right? Are you Sylvera are kind of at the front there in terms of dealing right with the buyers. We're on the producer side, so we kind of know what's going on. But what are some of the shifts you're seeing? Are we starting to see a wider market open up, I suppose, if that's the right words? I'm seeing indicators certainly in Southeast Asia, but what can you share in terms of what you're seeing from a market response point of view outside of the obvious announcements with the Microsofts and others?
We are seeing more and more interest in CDR, definitely, and the kind of things that we're being asked to deliver now are sort of guidance and advice and insights on CDR in general. Should we be participating in this market? Is it ready for a more kind of commercial participation? And then what project types are offer depending on who we're talking to, either the highest returns or the lowest risk or the greatest chance of delivering actual sort of tons of CO2, and which are going to be sort of optimized for scale. So there's a kind of general sort of market sort of oversight and overview that we're being asked to provide. And then specifically, okay, fine, I'm in, and I want to start sort of like dipping my toe into the marketplace now. So can you find us projects? And once you've found us those projects, can you advise or provide certainly sort of ratings and assessment tools for us to know as to whether these projects are worth either purchasing from or investing in? And so that is happening with a sort of group of organizations that extends well beyond Microsoft. However, that's great and it's extremely encouraging, but it's still very slow. Again, coming back to the scale of the challenge ahead of us, and it is. I don't know. It's a beef of mine, which is that I'm sort of old enough to remember working in sort of the emergence of the internet and the dot-com boom. And there are very many similarities between what's happening in CDR and what happened back then in sort of the mid to late 90s around the emergence of sort of the internet as this new and sort of crazy sort of concept and marketplace. And so many of the conversations that you have with commentators around CDR it just remind me of those days where it's a new market sector. Sort of who are the runners and riders? What do you think about this new thing called Google? There's all of this conversation about the emergence of a new commercial sector and how it's going to change sort of how we operate within the climate space. And it frustrates me because that is absolutely, in my view, not the way to be looking at it. We're in the middle of a massive climate crisis, which is only getting worse, every year. Our response shouldn't be looking at it through the lens of a new and interesting commercial sector and sort of shouldn't we participate. We need almost like a COVID-esque response to this particular issue. And I guess that brings me back to your original question, which is the private sector can only do so much, and we urgently need sort of government to step in at a far bigger scale in order to stimulate the demand that we need to get after this problem.
Yeah, I agree exactly. I mean, I'm also old enough to remember the dot-com era as well, but I agree with what you're saying. It's interesting. I think also from a technology standpoint, obviously you guys are in the tech space, but there's been an abundance of technology companies, VC backed, that are just kind of everywhere, and which is not a bad thing. But I've done a few podcasts with founders, and I realize many of these, for startups will just simply disappear. And again, this is probably my gripe. I feel like there should be more and more focus on the grassroots type solutions for this, which is what we do. And maybe I'm biased, of course, but and maybe that brings me to biochar, I suppose. But biochar, as I mentioned earlier, has gained a lot of attention in the last 12, 24 months. Microsoft again making big acquisitions for long-term contracts. Is it a fad? Is it something that's going to continue? And is it simply because biochar is delivering? Whereas, again, a lot of these direct air capture, some of these, I don't know if you call it risky, but certainly there is a lot of R&D around those technologies, and there's time needed for those to deliver. Yeah, what is your opinion on, why and how long, and will this continue, this kind of biochar excitement as such?
Biochar's been around for a long time, right? And if you trace its origin story, a really long time, thousands of years, and the whole terra preta discovery and what's been happening in the sort of Amazonian basin, etc. I mean, it is a we used to joke that it was, what was it, the oldest carbon removal technology that no one's ever heard of. It's been going for such a long time, and as such, it's TRL, its technology readiness level is very, very high. So it's proven. It not only is an effective means of removing carbon from the atmosphere, but it also delivers incredibly compelling and important co-benefits around sort of soil health and crop yields. And so I think as long as net zero is a sort of a guiding paradigm, for want of a better word, then I think biochar will be in the game. And no, I don't think it's a trend or a fad. I mean, but at the same time, it is limited to, again, back to our 10 billion tons, right? What's the total sequestration potential of biochar? It's around 2 billion tons per annum, which, that's a lot, but it isn't enough. And so we mustn't sort of view biochar as a silver bullet. But looking at it within the sort of the family of, or the suite of CDR project types that we have available to us now, I think biochar is certainly one of the most important, potentially the most important, and the one that we should be sort of looking to scale up as much as possible.
And how do you, I mean, I'm going to be biased. I'm in the global south. I'm in Thailand. We have projects through East Africa, Thailand, Indonesia. I see it as vital to this, and something we're constantly having to kind of put as a message out there to buyers, and most of our buyers. Thankfully, the buyer market for us is shifting also to this region, but up to date, most of it has been, Europe and North America. What's your view on the Global South and biochar and the importance, I suppose, that it plays in this as a role in CDR?
I mean, incredibly important, much more important than I think in the Northern Hemisphere and in sort of Europe and in North America. I mean, let me just contextualize that for a moment. We have seen the most significant progress in terms of biochar sort of presence in the marketplace in those two areas, Europe and North America. But I mean, you just have to look at the numbers in terms of how much biochar has actually been produced in those parts of the world. It's in the either the tens or the hundreds of thousands of tons. It's not very much, frankly. Through bitter experience, my days at Carbon Gold, trying to convince farmers and growers and even horticulturalists to use biochar as a soil amendment in an environment where the soil, in most cases, unless it's going to be completely sort of ruined by industrial agriculture, but in most cases it's pretty well looked after. The benefits are so marginal, it's a very difficult sell. Yeah. Take that to areas of the Global South, and you hear about these incredible improvements in water retention and nutrient cycling, and therefore crop yields. And so, again, in terms of your ability to engage people around the use of biochar, then the proposition is much more compelling in the Global South, and the potential scale as well. You're operating in an environment where the feedstock, biomass feedstock, there's just an abundance of it, and there's so much of it, and it's not so fiercely competed over as it is in areas like sort of in the north. So I think that is where we will see biochar scale up to deliver the majority of that 2 billion sequestration potential that it sort of that's on the table, that's on offer. However, we need the systems and the infrastructure, and in our case in Sylvera, sort of the assessment tools to actually sort of provide the confidence and trust around that being a sort of a viable project type. And I think we're about to come on to it, but that means that artisanal biochar production needs to be much better understood and much better supported from the kind of ecosystem that exists around the CDR world at the moment. And that includes ratings agencies, and that includes methodologies, and that will hopefully sort of encourage more buyers into that particular project type.
Yeah, well, you are correct. It was a bit of a pointed question to take me to talk about artisanal a bit, I know you guys, been dealing with you guys for more than a year now, and met some of the team in London, and often have calls. And I got a call next week, which I'm super excited about, to have a conversation around Sylvera rating artisanal, and so I haven't had that call. So I'm, and obviously this is a podcast, we don't need to go into the scope of that, but I'm really interested to hear, just to kind of just expand on what you just said, and how will Sylvera kind of approach this? I mean, like you said, there does need to be more, I suppose, analysis of these projects, because there are customers out there we know that love the co-benefits, that really want to invest. But there is also, when you show a farmer in a field, there is this nervousness. When you show a big fan from a direct air capture unit, it gets a different person excited for different reasons. So, yeah, I'd love to understand, a bit more, if you can kind of expand on what needs to be done, and how does Sylvera approach that, and what can we expect, I suppose, in terms of this next step with artisanal?
We're developing an assessment framework right now for artisanal biochar. It'll be available in the next couple of months. I'm particularly excited about it, and it will not only enable the assessment of the quantification of CDR from artisanal biochar, which does come with its own challenges. The production systems that involve there tend to be more rudimentary, and therefore subject to sort of a greater amount of emissions disappearing up into the atmosphere. Yeah. Maybe you may or may not recover the heat. There's certainly an issue around sort of methane production. So all of those things need to be understood, properly quantified, and in our case, we need to build the LCA models around those factors, and sort of in order to ensure that they're properly sort of calculated. But I think also what we need to emphasise, it's not, again, back to the sort of the kind of purist CDR world. we are in danger of looking at the world through this sort of very sort of focused lens of carbon only, and this sort of carbon tunnel vision, I think it's called. And we tend to forget that that projects such as these can deliver these incredibly important co-benefits. With that in mind, I'm also extremely excited about the gold standard, which, as you know, puts a huge emphasis on co-benefits in terms of the carbon and offset projects that it supports or provides sort of methodologies for. They are about to launch their biochar methodology, and it will support artisanal or enable artisanal biochar production. And I'm foreseeing that within that methodology there'll be a sort of a very strong emphasis on those soil-based co-benefits that will be an integral part of the certification and verification process. And I think that's super important. Again, going back to my early days at Carbon Gold, shuffling around a cocoa orchard with a cocoa grower. I mean, he didn't give a toss about carbon, frankly. It was a completely different and alien concept to him. It was only when the biochar had been in the ground for a meaningful period of time and he could see his crops growing either faster or more healthily, or he was reducing his fertilizer use. He was going, oh, okay, this is important, and I want to use it. And so, all of those things need to be sort of incorporated, I think, into a much broader than just carbon proposition for artisanal biochar production.
Super exciting. Lots of, and actually to your last point then, I mean, it's still the same. We're working with farmers every day, and the CDR piece to what we do is the financial mechanism for us to be able to do this, essentially. But the end usage, I mean, from the farmer's point of view, I mean, here's slightly different, but they're being taught a new way to deal with crop waste rather than burning. 50,000 people a year die from lung-related diseases just in the north of Thailand, which is crazy numbers that you don't see. So, but then again, so you're kind of you're reducing or slowing that. You're also then helping the crops. So yeah, I don't think those challenges and opportunities have really changed since then. It's still the same kind of work with farmers. I wanted to touch on something you just said, and I think good for the audience. You talked about gold standard, and obviously we're with CSI at the moment. That there's also other standards out there. When you come in as Sylvera, I think sometimes I've spoken to buyers, especially new buyers that are just getting into this space. There can sometimes it can take a bit of education to understand. Well, there's some methodologies here and guidelines to what we do, but then you still need the kind of Sylvera rating on top. Can you just explain why that value is important? If, for example, Gold Standard have a methodology coming out that says we must do it like this for it to be good, why is that not enough? I know this goes back maybe to the beginning of our conversation, but I think it's an important piece just to clarify the difference and why it's important what you guys do on top of the methodology.
Yeah, so first of all, there's the rating that Sylvera provides, which focuses on quality and integrity. Now, one would hope that by choosing an ICROA-backed, perhaps ICVCM-approved methodology through, one of the registries, so it would be that Puro, Isometric, Gold Standard, or Verra, then you are operating in an environment where that quality and integrity is sort of underpinned and assured. However, you don't have to investigate very far to see, and Carbon Direct has just published some interesting work on this, for example, where you just take that one project design and put it through any one of the biochar methodologies from the registries that I just mentioned, and you will come up with completely different results in terms of the volume of credits that you're going to generate. That's a number that's sort of super important to the project developer, because if I can generate, we've discovered that it's the variance is something like 30% in the difference in credit generation from just one methodology to another. However, when you also look at those how those methodologies treat the hallmarks of or sort of the assessment sort of criteria for quality and integrity, from buffers to leakage to LCA to project boundaries, some methodologies are more rigorous and robust than others, and so the kind of the complexity doesn't stop at the point of you choosing your methodology. You have to then look through that to ensure that the quantification criteria that the methodology is laid down is going to ensure not only a high volume of credit generation, because that's what you want, but also that those credits are going to be sort of high quality and have high integrity when it comes to their assessment.
Cool. And with that in mind, and if in terms of what you can share, what can we expect from an organization like Sylvera from an innovation point of view over the next few years? I mean, you guys, when you look at your roadmap, is AI something that's exciting? Are there other pieces of tech that are going to come in and make it even better for the buyer audience? Yeah. What are some of the exciting things on the roadmap?
While I bring to this market the benefit of the longevity of my experience, I'm also a bit of a tech dinosaur. So okay. I'm afraid I'm going to pass on the AI question. Okay. Obviously, it's important.
I used it as an example as well. Certainly not looking for specifics around anything.
I mean, obviously, it's important, and I do know what it is, and it's going to have a massive impact on the knowledge economy, as a whole. And I'm sure. Organizations like Sylvera will be able to optimize it and utilize it in a very beneficial way. I think where we are innovating at the moment is around our assessment of CDR project types, and where we are really having to dig into, and this is not just biochar specific, but project types across the sort of the different the spectrum, is this dynamic in the CDR space where the price of credits on the marketplace is still way over what buyers want to pay. And so what a project developer, and perhaps you know this yourself, that what a project developer can bring to the market from a price perspective for their credits, and that's even just break even, is still more than what buyers would consider to be good value for the purchase of those credits. And so unlike the sort of dynamic and nature-based solutions where sort of a high quality rating will give you, if your project is now an A, not a B, you can then start to charge more for your credits and generate more revenue as a result. In the CDR space, it's completely on its head, in as much as, you need, as a project developer, to bring your costs down rather than be able to charge more. And so one of the things that we're being asked a lot from buyers and investors is to look at and assess a project developer's ability to get down that cost curve through delivering economies of scale, reducing the cost stack that may be sort of associated with feedstock supply, MRV, et cetera. And thinking back to my days at Undo, for example, a key part of our investor pitch was how are you going to get your enhanced rock weathering credits from $350 per ton down to $200 per ton in a meaningful time frame? What needs to be true? What needs to happen? And that is, I think, universal across the whole sort of CDR project developer spectrum. And we are now developing assessment tools that specifically look at that to assure investors and buyers that the project developer that they're considering getting into has the tools in place to deliver those economies of scale and ultimately that cost reduction, so that price points get to a much more competitive level and, dare I say it, into the region where they may be able to operate in the compliance markets. Cool.
That leads me to another question, I suppose, around the spot versus offtake market. I mean, in those scenarios, is there a necessity from buyers to want to build up that confidence because they would rather be sticking with the same producer for the next 3, 4, 5, 10 years? Or this is something I asked this completely from a trying to understand the market point of view, even though I've been in it for a number of years, because it's very hard to, we'll get these requests for spot credits suddenly because probably it's a particular time of year. But I think every producer really would prefer to be getting into long-term offtakes or contracts of some sort because you can plan better. Do these type of things help that, do you think, from a buyer perspective?
I think they help enormously because again, in my previous role, or Undo, we were negotiating offtake contracts with good old Microsoft, and the off-taker needs to know that the project developer is going to be around for long enough to deliver against a long-term offtake contract. And we're talking about anything from could be 5 years, could be 10 years. And so you need to prove that you've got not only the kind of the infrastructure and the expertise and the skill and the funding, as well as the project design to deliver across that sort of time frame. As well as a strategy that's going to enable you, or to give you the resilience to navigate successfully through what's going to be a bit of a choppy ride. And so that kind of assessment is super important for both buyers and off-takers.
Cool. To talk about challenge, I mean, we kind of mentioned challenges. You've brought some up, but I'd still like to ask the question. I mean, obviously, the 0.37 challenge is definitely one. I mean, I don't even know if it's a challenge. That's just a reality. It's a problem more than something to solve. But what do you think are the biggest challenge we have in this space? You can talk about that again, and maybe on the flip of that, where do you see us going in the next 5 to 10 years? I suppose, what is the optimism around those challenges, if there is?
Yeah, the challenge is unquestionably about scale. I just wish people would focus more on that 0.37 number and respond in a way that's commensurate with the crisis that sits in front of us, rather than this sort of new and interesting and funky sort of commercial sector that's sort of growing around us. What we urgently need to do is get greater level of government support for the CDR marketplace, and that is happening in pockets, and it's certainly happening in the UK. But it's not enough. We've got talk of CDR being incorporated into the compliance markets. We've got BECCS and DACCS have been sort of the project types have been sort of highlighted for the first sort of wave of inclusion into the compliance markets. But the similar thing is happening in the EU, for example. So all of these send out very strong demand signals. Very exciting. The compliance market obviously massive compared to the voluntary carbon market, and so that I think is a very hopeful sign. I just wish it could happen quicker, and we had in place mechanisms that accommodated the fact that it is risky, and there is uncertainty, and you can't just wait till everything's going to be what is it? Don't let sort of perfect get in the way of good. And so because frankly, if we don't respond now, we're pretty screwed. And so we can't wait for it to be absolutely right before sort of, okay, now we're ready for a Biochar methodology, or now we're ready for an enhanced rock weathering methodology. We've got to do it all now, and the kind of learn by doing, which seems to be sort of the mantra of the voluntary carbon market, but we're not sort of doing enough.
Yeah, right. The government piece is interesting. I'm been somewhat involved in this lobbying group in Europe, so you can see things happening. That the problem, I think, is you need government backing this, but government tends to slow things down. So there's a kind of issue, but there's no way to get around that. I mean, it has to happen, and we're seeing it here in Asia as well. I mean, the other problem, I suppose, is that governments don't particularly talk to each other around the world. It does happen, but how do you see that role in terms of government within region versus the kind of global mission of what this really is? I mean, it's not a mission by country, right? I mean, I know that's a bit of a big question, but what do you have any views on that, I suppose?
Well, I mean, the good news is Sylvera has a fantastic policy team, and they're probably better placed to answer questions like, what about Article 6, 6.2, 6.4, and how's that, and ITMOs, et cetera. I mean, but looking at it from, I was in the expert group advising UK government on the development of its BECCS and DACCS methodologies, and that's great in as much as these are two project types that will hopefully now find a place within the compliance market. But projects need to be based in the UK in order to participate in that market. Now, I guess that kind of makes sense from an NDC perspective, but you're right. We need to massively internationalize the scope and the market and the infrastructure and the mechanisms in order to make this happen. And I know there are sort of groups that are trying to get project developers who are operating in the global south generating credits that can then be traded into compliance markets, nationally organized compliance markets. So those motivations are there, but again, it is happening very slowly.
Cool. Look, I didn't really have any more questions, but I suppose, is there anything I haven't asked that you'd like to share? And after that, please also, where do people find out more about yourself, Sylvera, and get in touch?
Nothing that we haven't sort of covered already, I don't think. The CDR space as a sort of subsector of the voluntary carbon market, I think it is a very sort of exciting place to work, and I hope as eventually we'll see a kind of a brain drain into CDR like we did into the financial services or indeed sort of the .com sectors back in sort of the 90s and the early 2000s, because that's what we need. Because we need to put, as many shoulders behind the wheel as possible for this sort of, rather unique challenge. In terms of how to get hold of us, well, obviously, Sylvera is pretty easy to find us on the internet. Do please get in contact and let us know if we can help in any way as regards navigating your way through the ever sort of complex or increasingly complex voluntary carbon market.
Cool. Well, for anyone watching or listening, I'll leave the Sylvera address in the notes, and I appreciate you taking the time. It's been interesting, and I'm super excited, obviously, about some of the support and mechanisms around artisan that you guys are looking at, and I'll learn more about that next week. But otherwise, have a great day, and thanks for joining.
No problem. Thanks for having me.